Yeah, okay, so we are finally, finally, finally going to look at Gaston Leroux. Oh my goodness, the creator of Phantom of the Opera. Yes, it's going to happen. I feel so bad because I kept saying, we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this. And it never happened. But it kind of works out because of the fact that this is spooky season and because he gave us the wonderful, wonderful creation known as Phantom of the Opera. Well, here we are. So, Gaston Leroux, okay, he was born May 6th, 1868, to a prominent family, Marie and Dominique Leroux. He was born in Paris. His father rebuilt old castles. And so I never would have guessed. And now he had two brothers and a sister. I couldn't find I would have at least wanted to know their names, but I couldn't find anything. And but um now because of them, of course, being of a prominent family or a well-to-do family, especially if his dad's rebuilding castles and everything, uh the hope was that, of course, Gaston would get a good education and get a good career, a nice. And well, at first, Gaston was like, yeah, I'll do that. He was on board with that. He went to Normandy, graduated with honors, and then he went to Caen, I believe is how you say it. Again, there's going to be French words here, and I'm sorry in advance if I say things incorrectly. I do apologize. I feel bad when I say things incorrectly. But he went to Caen to study law. He graduated in 1889. Now, while he was studying law, his mom passed away. So Marie LaRue died. Okay. Now, as he was working to get his law office together, 20 years old, he gets the news that his dad passed away and he's going to collect his inheritance. Now, again, he's got two brothers and a sister, so they're going to collect as well. Um, everywhere I looked said that he received millions in francs. Now, you would think that he would put this into his uh, upcoming law firm and all of that. That's not what he did at all. Those millions of francs went into drinking and gambling. Again, he's 20 years old. And yeah, I remember being 20, but I didn't drink. I don't drink, but still, millions. Now I don't know the translation of franc to American dollar, but still, you know, you just graduated, and even when you went to school, graduate with honors and all that. I mean, and I don't. But so his parents are gone, and I read somewhere, one place in particular said, yeah, his family basically were like, oh, so you're just throwing everything away, whatever. It's basically what it was. And once he uh hit that bankruptcy wall, it was like, crap, what do I do? Yeah, you did this. You did this. Well, as it turns out, he had been writing some as he was in school, he had been writing some short stories, as we all do. And don't lie, we've all done that, right? Written some little ditties here and there while we're trying to not listen to the teacher. Yeah, he did that, and he also wrote some poems, and he got them published. And the newspaper was called Le Echo de Paris. And so they knew him, and they gave him a job. So he lucked out. This is where he started in journalism. Okay. So in 1890, he started as a court reporter and theater critic for L'Echo de Paris. Okay. I tried to find articles with his name on them and I couldn't find any. Even if I couldn't read what it said, I figured I could read Gaston Leroux, but I couldn't find anything. But or at least like one of his poems or something and translate it. And no, I couldn't find that. Now, in 1893, he started working for another paper called Le Martin. Now, the Echo de Paris isn't around anymore. That went under, closed its doors in 1944. As for Le Martin, I don't know if it's still around. I should have checked, but I don't know if it's still going. And he did quite a bit of investigative reporting. In fact, he wrote a lot of reports on this Auguste Vaillant, or Vaillant, I'm sorry. He was an anarchist. He detonated a bomb in the House of Deputies and everything. So, um, he became his investigative work made him the most famous criminal reporter in France. And his technique, people, I mean, he was very intelligent, very smart, considering that he graduated with honors and everything. I would imagine that, but he would interview the criminals, investigators, the prison directors and the officers. I mean, he just went the whole 9 years. When I was reading about how he just went straight in, it reminded me of Nellie Bly. You know, Nellie Bly and how she did her work. I mean, she locked herself up in that insane asylum to get into, yeah. And I didn't see where he did that, but now he also uh his work also, he ended up at the Opera House. Uh, in fact, I think I have it here. I think I have it still up. And let's see, which one is it? Yeah, right here. Reporting instincts were also used for in-depth coverage of the former Paris Opera being used as cells to house prisoners of the Paris Commune in the basement. And that was another reason why I saw him as Nellie Bly, because again, with her, where she uh, was going into insane asylums, and then of course going into some of those places to see how they were treating the kids and that kind of thing. So, it wasn't just the not half-assing it. He was going the full 9 yards, a lot like Nellie Bly. So, now he was, because of his work as an investigative reporter, he received the Order of the Legion of Honor, and that was in 1909. And now he had two marriages. Okay, now the first one was complicated. I had a hard time following this one. Apparently, the first marriage was to a Marie uh, Lafargue, and I did find a Marie, but I don't know if it was the same one. There is a poet and playwright, and she did end up over in America. She did flee the country or something like that. That's what it sounded like anyway. I guess her father had her come over here. I don't think it's the same person. Okay. So I don't want to say that, but there was a Marie Lafont that he married, and it was like as soon as they got married, it's like, what are we doing? Okay, but she, uh, it's one of those things where it's like you get married to someone like on the fly or something. It's like, oh, you have a pretty face, I must marry you, and then all of a sudden you're like, what are we doing? Um, so she's an Orthodox Catholic, and she she really had all kinds of problems with him. So he was preparing for reincarnation, and she had a real problem with that. And he had like this whole thing about death and the parallel universes and all that. She just had fits about that and said that if she's she basically said if you publish your thoughts on this matter, it will disgrace the family. Okay, so they separated, broke up in 1902, but she refused to give him a divorce. It's like, okay, you have a problem with this guy, but yeah, she's a bitch. So this is the bottom line. I'm like, good Lord. Okay, so you're controlling what he can and can't publish. Okay. I felt bad for him when I was reading that, but at the same time, it's like, well, you did marry her, you know. It's, you know, you make the choices, you got to deal with them. And but he did find another lady. Now her last name, I was finding like two different last names for her, but her first name is Jenny. I found one place where it says that her name was Jenny K, and the other place said, and I think it was a translation problem. Um, or it could be Jean. Jenny or Jean. It's Kayet or Kaye. Again, I'm sorry if I'm saying these names incorrectly. I will have all the information in the description box for you, of course. And she, they met while he was working as a journalist and covering the Russian Revolution. Okay, so he was in Russia, and now he was present and there at the Russian Revolution. When all that went down, he was there. And when all that flared up, he was there and he met her. They were head over heels for each other. They just adored each other and they were together until he died. Okay. They had kids together. Their first child was born in St. Petersburg. Okay. But the problem was is that they basically were in secret. Like it was basically an open secret. I mean, people could tell that they were just absolutely infatuated with each other. But the problem was is because Marie refused to give him a divorce, they couldn't get married. Okay, so he and Jean or Jenny, I guess Jenny would be a nickname or a shorter name. But yeah, so they couldn't get married until Marie died, and she died in 1917. Okay, so yeah, so that it couldn't have been the one that I saw, because but anyway, but they had several kids, but the first one was born while they were in in St. Petersburg, and that would have been like 1905. Okay. Um, yeah, because when he traveled, she was there. So it was kind of like, yeah, they're together. So yeah, he was there. He covered the and was present at the Russian Revolution in 1905. Now, in Morocco, he was in Morocco. He traveled all over, and in Morocco, how he uh, reported events in Morocco and became a journalist there, a reporter there, is that he actually darkened his face and his beard, and he was actually accepted by people there, uh, the citizens there, and they let him just mingle with. And what's funny about that is not only did he use that in Phantom of the Opera Eric when he talks about Eric being in Persia, um, so he does what a lot of writers do is his own personal experience is put on his characters. Not only that, but in Indiana, because when I was reading about this, I was like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. Okay, so in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, there is a moment where in young Indy and his family, when it's little Indy, like 9-year-old Indy, and his family are visiting somebody in Morocco, and this guy who is going around and he's covering something. Now, I don't know if that's Gaston Leroux. I should have looked, but I don't think it is. I think it's just George Lucas heard about this and decided to throw it in. But yeah, they're in Morocco. And so I found that interesting. That it was, but that was something about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles is that they would have stuff like that. Indiana Jones mingled with people like this. I'll have to look. I will put it in the description box if that was actually Gaston Leroux that they um that they talked to, because I don't think it is, but we'll see. But I will look. Now, as for his journalism career, it ended in 1907. Now, I saw two different stories here. Okay, so one story says that he came home from covering a volcano eruption. Okay, and I looked high and low. I couldn't find where an eruption happened in 1907 or even in 1906 because, it could have been that it was early in 1907. Okay, I couldn't find a volcanic eruption happening during that time. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Well, he gets another phone call to go on location somewhere else, and he just hangs up the phone. Okay. Now, the other one here, okay, so it says that he just returned from another exhausting business trip to Morocco, and he woke up at 3 in the morning, and his editor instructed him to urgently leave where a large French battleship had exploded. Leroux looked at Jenny and his children and at the warm bed which he slept in for the first time after many weeks, and then said a few words to his editor and hung up the phone. And that was it. So whichever story it was, he just decided he had had enough. Okay. He was done. And from the sound of it, they only had two kids. So it was his son, uh, Michael, and Madeline, which they called Mickey. So Mickey and Madeline were Gaston and Jenny's children. And so, to be honest, after all of that, yeah, I would say, who knows? Maybe he said go to hell, and then, well, as it turns out, this is when he decided to turn to fiction. He had already had the photojournalism, I mean, just journalism, and he had covered that, traveled all over the place, and he turned to fiction. Now he'd done that a little bit already when he was back in school, and did the poetry and some scribbles here and there. He decided to do it full time. Okay, and he had a character named Joseph Rolletabille. Now, again, I'm sorry if I say this incorrectly. And what I was reading is that this is slang. This is French slang for globetrotter. Globetrotter. So again, he's putting himself into this character, into Joseph, because he was a globetrotter, basically. He was traveling all over the place to do this work. Now, Joseph is an amateur detective. Okay, and he was introduced in 1908. This book was titled The Mystery of the Yellow Room. And this character, being amateur, was more capable, a bigger thinker and more capable than the the police were, a lot like Sherlock Holmes. And I mean, if you want to think of more modern stuff, a lot like Psych, even though they were police officers, but in a goofy way. There were a lot of times I'd watch those Psych episodes, and they didn't seem like those two guys didn't seem like police officers at all. They were so silly. Uh, this turned into a series. Okay. And and it has a comic series and all and that kind of thing. And and it became a big hit. And now Leroux's contribution to French detective fiction has been known to be parallel to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in the UK with his Sherlock series, with his Sherlock character, and Edgar Allan Poe in the US. Now, Edgar Allan Poe has several different detectives in his take your pick, but he's just mystery in general, gothic mystery, and but um I don't know that I have read any of these, but I may have to. And it could be that I have and just didn't know it. All right. So let's look at Phantom of the Opera. Okay. So Phantom of the Opera. Now, it started as a serial in 1909 through 1909 to 1910, and then it was released as a book in 1910 over in France. Then there was the English translation in 1911. Now, again, this was a time when authors would release a chapter, send it to a newspaper or magazine, and it was basically like a tune in next week kind of a deal. Now, at this point in 1909, 1910, that was kind of outdated. Uh, Maybe I'm weird, but it just seems like because of the fact that, you think of like Louisa May Alcott with Little Women, that's what she did. And oh shoot, the author for White Fang, that's what he did. Jules Verne did it. And so there were a lot of these authors from like back in the 1800s, like the 1860s and everything. That's what they were doing, and um into the late, into the 1890s. But by the Edwardian era, you would think that they wouldn't do that anymore. They would just release the book. But whatever. Uh, but yeah, so it was a serial. He was releasing these, and I don't know what newspaper. I should check that. But now here's an interesting thing. Okay, so when it was released as a serial, the serial version contains a chapter that never appeared in the book. So when he released the book, he kept a piece out. However, much of the contents of that particular chapter is added to other chapters. So little bits here and there are, and that doesn't mean that the full chapter of that particular chapter is in Phantom of the Opera. So I found that interesting. So you could sit there and argue, well, the full thing is Mm-mm. Now here's the other thing, is that it was not reprinted in English until 2014. So we didn't get it until here in America, we didn't get it until 2014. Yeah, we're not special. As much as a lot of Americans seem to think so. They think that America is the center of the universe. It's not. I don't think even the sun is, honestly. And there's a lot of people who seem to think that the sun is the center of the universe. I think we'd be surprised. Okay, so the book actually is connected to events surrounding the opera house. Okay, so let me go back and right. All right. So the setting of the Phantom of the Opera is the actual Paris Opera House. Leroux heard the rumors about the time the opera house was finished, and these rumors became closely linked to the novel. Act one of the opera, Hella, had just finished when a fire in the roof of the opera house melted through a wire holding a counterweight of the chandelier, causing a crash that injured several and killed one. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Using this accident paired with rumors of a ghost in that same opera house, Leroux wrote Phantom of the Opera and published it in 1910, which was later published in English. Yeah. So the underground lake that he wrote about, which is in reality an enormous cistern, does exist beneath the opera house, and it is still used for training firefighters to swim in the dark. And so, yeah, those are the two things that it is connected to. Um, Especially that whole thing having to do with the chandelier. Um, there are a lot of people who talk about, well, there was a ghost that was moving around in there and everything. And, maybe there was. I mean, people talk about haunted buildings all the time and everything. They talk about the Titanic being haunted and that kind of thing. And, believe what you want. I'm not going to say anything against that. I have things that I believe in that is, people are like, what the hell? But, who's to say that there wasn't a ghost? Maybe there was. Okay. But when it comes down to it, it was that particular thing that Gaston Leroux was using. Okay. It's a lot like Alexander Dumas, which Gaston Leroux was a huge fan of. He absolutely loved Gaston Leroux absolutely loved Alexander Dumas. Dumas, little side note here, when it comes to Man in the Iron Mask, so there actually was a Man in the Iron Mask. Okay, a lot of people don't know that. Or if they do, they seem to think that Alexander Dumas wrote actual things. Okay, so nobody knew who actually was the Man in the Iron Mask except for the king and the key jangler guy. The prison warden or whatever. I'm gonna get it for calling him the key jangler guy. Um, those were the only two people who knew the name of this particular individual. And even back then, people were uh, claiming they knew who he was. Nobody knew. Okay. Nobody knew the name of this particular individual. And there were reasons for that. Okay. Because he was a very bad guy. There was no reason to go blabbing his name all over the creation. Okay. He had done terrible, terrible things. He didn't need to go down in history for it. Okay. Yeah, let's go back to that. Anyway, Alexander Dumas decided to write a story, Man in the Iron Mask, that was his idea of what it was. He was making it silly, okay? And that's basically what it was. That was his idea of who Man in the Iron Mask was. Okay, it's historical fiction, is what it is. Okay, and he did get in trouble. linking the king to it. Yeah. Uh, King didn't find it funny. But this is the same thing. Okay. Uh, Same thing. At least Gaston Leroux didn't get in trouble. Yeah. Now, uh, well, I'll wait for that one. Because I was gonna say something, but I'll wait. Okay. So the reception for his book, it's been thought for years that it got critical reception. The Phantom of the Opera way back in 1910, back in the Edwardian era, got terrible reviews and it was hated and it got low reviews and all of that. Okay, no, no. Actually, that's not true. Not true at all. Okay, for two reasons. Okay, now when Phantom of the Opera came to America, uh, New York Times said that people hated it and were disappointed in it because, of course, here's a ghost going all over the place. It turns out it's an actual man. And okay, now I can understand that being a disappointment. But why is New York, see, the media doesn't change. Why is New York Times, just because one person, this one journalist, is upset, doesn't mean everybody else in America is upset by it. See how that works? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Don't speak for the rest of us. And that's exactly how it was. It turns out that um, Gaston Leroux in 1919 created a film production company with an actor, Rene Navarre, and a playwright, Arthur Baretti. Again, I'm sorry if I'm saying their names incorrectly. I think we've seen Rene in a couple of the French films that we've looked at. Um, so they got together and they made this film production company. And the only reason they did is so that they could publish novels and turn them into film. And Renee just wanted to act. And so, well, they created the first film for Phantom of the Opera. Now, I was looking to see if it was lost. Now, I don't see it in the list for uh for the Society of Cineromans, which was their production company. I don't see it, but that doesn't mean that it's lost. Okay. Because a lot of times with some of these lists, they don't list everything. Okay. Now, um, speaking of Cineromans, in 1922, Leroux lost interest in filmmaking after there was a dispute with the studio owner. I can understand that. Now, it was taken over by a path, which Pathe, which we see that name quite a bit. That's on a lot of these movies. I think that's still going, but I don't know, but for sure. And as it turns out, his daughter, I don't know about his son, but his daughter appears in a few of these films. I don't know which ones, but his daughter does appear. Um, but uh, this Society of the Cineromans, and it stars Rene, made the first film for Phantom of the Opera. And again, I couldn't find it, but I will keep looking. Now, there are several of these films that have survived, and I'm going to look at them. So, so this Saturday, don't be surprised if one of them is going to be one of Gaston Leroux's films. I think this is fun. This is absolutely fun. And so this makes sense as to why when uh, Carl LeMail, I'm sorry if I'm saying his name incorrectly, but when he bought the rights to do Phantom of the Opera, and of course he already had Lon Chaney in mind to to be Eric the Phantom, it makes sense that Gaston would give his blessing. Of course, Carl was in Paris. The story goes that Carl was in Paris. He was looking at the opera house. He had one of his other associates there to make sketches and everything so that they could get the set design. And they happened to meet Gaston Leroux himself. They have dinner and he explains what he wants to do. And Gaston is basically like, "You have my blessing." I would love to see it. I would absolutely love to see this go. Everything. He says, and I think that um that Lon Chaney is a perfect. Well, it turns out that Gaston never got to see the final product. He never got to see the 1925 film. Okay. Now, he passed away on April 15th, 1927. The movie never made it to to France by then. I didn't see when it made it to France, but I know it's like 2 years because 1925 is when it was released, and then you would think that by a year at least it would have, but no, no, he never got to see the final product, and that's just too bad, you know. However, I know I said it in another uh, video. Of course, Carl wanted to make a sequel. Now, of course, there was the transitions going on from silent to talkie, and the sound version had been released with the soundtrack and everything. And he wanted to do a sequel for Phantom of the Opera. Okay. And the estate, of course, that means that Jenny and one of Gaston's brothers said, "I think that he would love that. He would absolutely love that." But it never happened. Never happened. And so I tried to find more information on that as to why it didn't happen, but it didn't. It did. And it could be because of Lon Chaney's passing. I don't know. I don't know what happened, um but anyway, in closing, that is Gaston Leroux. I thoroughly enjoyed learning about Gaston. I did not expect to learn about his journalism career. I really was not expecting that. I, I do feel bad about his first marriage, but you know what? You married her. I'm just glad that he found somebody that, he found Jenny and had two children by her and and everything. And I actually want to I will look up the silent films that they created. I do think we have seen Rene on this channel with some of the French films and and uh I will be looking at the Joseph series because I don't think I've ever read them. And if I have, I don't remember. I would think I would remember, but because They sound like a lot of fun. I mean, I absolutely love Sherlock Holmes, and they sound a lot like Sherlock Holmes. And but anyway, I will close up here.